Think of a Premier League player, someone who began their career in the lower leagues and made it all the way to the top. Now, let me channel some Darren Brown and say that you thought of a striker, whether you went old school or more recent. There are notable examples in other positions, but why were so many of the players that came to mind goal scorers? Are they more memorable because of their ability to put the ball in the back of the net, or do they actually manage to make the climb up the divisions more often for some reason? Before coming up with any concrete theories, I first had to make a large spreadsheet and check the data to see if my intuition was correct. I searched for players with 10 or more starts from 2015 to 2025 in the Premier League, 1,253 players. Then I manually clicked through every single one of those player profiles and made note of anybody who started a season in League 2 or lower, aged 22 or older. I also didn't include loans. While a player who is on loan to a team in League 2 or the National League can be notable, it's still absolutely not the same vibe as a player from those leagues working their way up club by club. So I logged my results and well, the stats backed up my hunch, with 8 out of the 20 players that I'd found who came from the lower leagues were strikers, a disproportionate amount. Now, there might be sample size issues at play, or you could take issue with my search criteria, but strikers made up an awful lot of the near misses, and the stats were similar when taking all ages of players into account. So I think, at the very least, it reaches the realm of being statistically interesting. This potential discrepancy between strikers and other positions has to be explained by reasons which could be sorted into 2 separate categories. First of all, we have developmental reasons. This category is for you if you believe that there are skills a striker can learn better in the lower leagues than in academies and in the higher leagues. If you think that receiving regular game time is vital for a striker in order to develop positioning or an ability to read the game, or if learning to play against more physical opposition provides some kind of long-term benefit, any technical, physical, or mental skills that you think a striker develops better in the lower leagues when compared to other positions, you can slot in under this heading. I think the main benefit in development for a lot of the players who make it all the way to the Premier League is just receiving a bit of a reality check and copping themselves on a bit. I looked for all the clips I could find of people speaking about their time at this level. Most of the responses are ones where they talk about concepts like mental toughness and receiving a reality check, rather than any particular technical skills that they learn. Although I will admit that the question of what skills did you learn in the lower leagues that benefited you in your career is very difficult to answer conclusively, as it's something that is potentially impossible to untangle and isolate among such an interwoven set of skills and personal experiences, even for those who have lived it. But those mental benefits should hold for all positions who make the drop down, and not just strikers. You could say that something like extra resilience or resolve is a bit more important for strikers, who arguably benefit from these mental attributes more due to the nature of the position, like when they hit a dry spell or have a game where they're not getting a lot of touches. But I'm not necessarily a massive believer in the lower leagues developing anything special in strikers that wouldn't also apply to any other position. So I'd personally put more weight into what I'm calling the systemic explanations. Stick any reason that you want here that isn't to do with the individual player's skill. My best theories are that goals are a highly valued stat that instantly garners attention, so players putting up big numbers in that category can only be ignored for so long, whereas a player in another position may be making a similar impact without any stat which announces their presence as loudly. If this is the case, then the emergence of advanced stats will probably help to bridge the gap somewhat. Teams also value strikers extremely highly, as I explored in detail in my last video. This means that they might be willing to roll the dice on risks from the lower leagues more often, and are more likely to overlook character issues with promising young strikers who are looking to make a bounce back from the lower leagues. A lot of the notable names who have risen from the non-league as strikers had character concerns that may have slowed down the ascent of a similarly skilled fullback or goalkeeper. Strikers could potentially also be harder to identify when players are younger, because there are a lot of intangibles involved. Confidence, the ability to read the game, positioning, and composure are all skills which are key to a striker's game, but which aren't as easy to diagnose in young players through training sessions and academy games, compared to more flashy technical skills like dribbling or physical traits like speed. There could be a range of other things with varying effects in a similar vein, but those are my sort of best shouts. I do think that most players who clearly have the ability to play at the top level are scooped out of the lower leagues pretty quickly, but I'd guess that there were a few players in other positions who could have made the same jump to the Premier League in that same time frame if given the chance. An economical midfielder who can throw himself around, or a defensive fullback for a team on the fringes of the Premier League. But I'll obviously never be able to prove that. It's more of a hunch based off of how bad humans can be at evaluating talent and the biases that can creep in. I do welcome any and all of your theories as to why we might get more high quality strikers from the lower leagues than any other position. If you're only here for the question posted in the title, then you can leave now. But if you're a sicko who's not just happy with one thing they categorically can't answer and instead needs two, then tell me this: are we going to see more or less players making the jump up from the lower leagues in the future? Now, this may not shock you given the types of videos I make on here, but I spent a lot of time as a Wayne clicking through player profiles on Championship Manager 0102 or CM4 and looking at players' transfer histories. And I remembered a lot more instances of lower league sides popping up in there than I was seeing going through the modern day data when I was pontificating about strikers. To check if it was just a nostalgia talking, I speed clicked through some Premier League squads from 2000 to 2001. A slightly less rigorous search than before found that there were roughly 18 players who fit the bill, matching the exact same requirements that pulled only 20 players from 10 years in 2015 to 25. The numbers were a lot higher when taking all ages into account too, but you'll have to take my word on that. So the numbers are definitely lower versus 20 odd years ago. It's a change that makes sense intuitively when I stop and think about it. I just hadn't realised it was happening with the slow creep year after year, with the most obvious influence being the increasingly international nature of the English footballing pyramid during the time period in question. Players now have to compete with more players from more leagues relative to the early 2000s in order to make the jump up. What I'm more interested in is what the next 10 or so years look like in comparison. English football is a different beast in 2025 when compared to the turn of the millennium. There are the changes that are front and centre, like wealthy owners and the explosion in transfer fees, or tactical shifts and changes like the decline of the 4-4-2. But what if I said changes to player development and the academy setup? I feel like that answer is a lot more likely to elicit a shrug. The casual fan might know about any youngsters who came through their academy and be aware of some of the stronger academies in football. If you're a bit more dedicated as a football fan, you might be aware of something like the Elite Player Performance Plan or the various loan armies that have been built by certain clubs. These changes, which may seem more subtle for the average fan of a Premier League team, will be much more well known to those supporting a club a bit further down the footballing pyramid. And they've also completely changed the path that a player needs to take in order to go from the lower leagues to the Premier League. It's possible that the change in demographics was the only factor at play. If so, then with tightening visa rules following Brexit, you'd expect to see a slight increase in the numbers making the climb in the future. But what had really caught my eye was just how often I was seeing loan in the lower leagues, with players coming from a more condensed selection of academies and teams filtering down throughout the leagues rather than the more scattergun distribution that I was used to seeing in the past. The development of young players has become more and more of a priority for top clubs in recent times. Inflated transfer fees throughout football means that developing even one world-class young player will pay back the money invested in the academy and coaching structure multiple times over. It's not uncommon now to see top sides use the sale of their academy developed players to fund their lavish spending. Throw in the added difficulty of signing foreign players post-Brexit and a level of flexibility when it comes to squad registration rules in the Premier League and European competitions, and the incentives are clear. On what I'm sure is a completely unrelated note, the Premier League pushed through a massive restructuring of player development in 2012 with the Elite Player Performance Plan. This introduced a standardised tiered fee for signing players in the academy system, meaning that the teams with the best academies, aka the teams with the most money, can sign any player they like from lower ranked academies, while also removing the need for youth signings to live within a certain distance of the club. This signed and sealed the right for teams at the top to siphon the best academy talents into their setups with zero resistance and minimal fees. The plan was passed with significant pressure from the Premier League, who threatened to pull the funding that they provided to lower league clubs for youth development if the plan wasn't passed. It ended up with 46 clubs in favour versus 22 voting against the plan. Academy sizes have also ballooned, with more and more children becoming involved at younger and younger ages. Of England's 2024 Euro squad, 22 of them were signed to an EPP academy before the age of 10, with only one, Jared Bowen, coming outside of an academy system. And anyone like Jared Bowen, who does escape the academy setup and shows even a hint of flourishing in the lower league levels at a young age, is an incredibly hot commodity, with them being nearly instantly hoovered up into Premier League or Championship setups. It took 8 games of non-league football before Hull took the chance on Bowen, Dan Burn 14 games for Darlington before signing for Fulham, etc, etc. If you take the list from 2000 to 2001, you can split it neatly into 2 sorts of players: those who drop down to the lower leagues from sides and academies higher up, and those who are undiscovered talents before making a name for themselves in the lower leagues. Well, with these changes in academy sizes, the ability to siphon any talented youngster from any academy, how quick teams are to jump on younger talents in the lower leagues, and how aggressively teams can scout now with the increased connectivity in the smartphone era, I think you can basically eliminate the category of undiscovered talents that existed in the past. The days of finding Ian Wright at the age of 22 out of nowhere are gone. It's been estimated that there are up to 12,000 players in the youth development system, with only 0.5% of those players who join at the age of 9 making a living out of the sport by the time they are finished. We're rapidly approaching a future where literally every single player in the Premier League who grew up in England is going to have been involved with an EPPP, is going to have been involved with one of these academies in some capacity. And while in that system, the top clubs will have years to churn through all of the available players to pick out those who appear to be the most talented. They'll never be 100% accurate, but the game has been rigged firmly in favour of the top teams, taking players who may previously have made the climb and integrated them into their setups before they can ever have the chance to make their names in the lower leagues. That doesn't necessarily mean that the numbers making the jump will go down. Sides further down the pyramid have been taking academy cast-offs, spotting the hidden gems and polishing them up for years now. Whether it's attitude issues, perceived physical deficiencies, or simply a matter of needing some game time to find their feet, there's an endless list of players released from top academies who went down the leagues before bouncing back up. Theoretically, the increased numbers in top academies should mean that more quality, technical players filter down to the lower leagues, potentially narrowing the gap. This could mean that with some development or a reality check from facing their footballing mortality, that more players are more likely to make the jump back up. I personally err on the side of thinking that we'll continue to see a drop, for the reason that I think a lot of teams are really leaning into hoarding as many cheap youngsters as they can, with repeated loans and extended stints in the Premier League too, to try and ensure that they thoroughly evaluate any talent that they've got at the club, hoping to avoid the costly mistake of releasing a potentially Premier League level player for free. For illustration purposes, I've picked out a completely random player released from a Premier League team this year. I introduced to you Ben Jackson from Brighton. He's the perfect example of a player who probably would have been released at 18 or 19 a few years ago. Instead, he's being released as he approaches 22, with loans at Livingston and Queen's Park. Now, released, he's in a race against time if he wants to rebuild his career to the point where he gets back to that same level ever again. The only thing keeping this hoarding in check at the minute is the regulation in place around loans, but as we've seen from Chelsea's loan army days, clubs will push this as far as they can. And there's a new, even greater danger that's looming large on the horizon: multi-club ownership. Each new club that's roped into the multi-club structure, the true abomination of modern day football, is another set of chances to hoard all of the top talent that you've accumulated through the academy setup. Another way to hold on to the rights of players, to make sure that any benefit the lower league clubs could glean from the excesses of your academy are instead kept to the top teams. Look at the poster child of the non-league in recent years, Jamie Vardy. He was released from the Sheffield Wednesday Academy just before a growth spurt. He'd been sentenced to house arrest for an assault, which would have kept interest down. He rejected an earlier move up the leagues to Rotherham, rejecting a short-term contract with them. And then finally, when he did perform in the conference for Fleetwood, he stood out so much that he was signed all the way straight up to the Championship. And this was all before the EPPPP and the widespread adoption of multi-club ownership or loan armies. Is it crazy for me to think that the odds of a player with Jamie Vardy's talent even making it to the lower leagues have dramatically reduced, thus reducing the amount of players going from non-league to Premier League? So that's why I think the numbers will continue to decrease. If you're twisting my arm and wanted me to play devil's advocate, then I'll briefly oblige. I think you could make the argument that players who manage to escape the doldrums of repeated loans have a lot to gain by being settled with one club and consistently seeing playing time. If a player who is talented enough manages to find a permanent club lower down, that could give them a serious edge in experience, in certain aspects of game awareness, and self-confidence and other intangibles. There's the previously mentioned issue of Brexit and stricter visa requirements coming into full effect, with increasing squad sizes and more of a reliance on depth, giving more spaces to fill in Premier League squads, ones that could potentially go to players who commit to the grind and work their way back up the leagues. All of that makes a decent case, but I personally doubt that any of the teams in the conference will be allowed to get their grubby little hands on enough of the merchandise that's fit for sale. They'll just be allowed in to stock the shelves and sort the inventory while the top teams take all the profits. But I'll be hoping that more players beat the odds and the doubters, including me, and find their way up the footballing ladder. Here's a clip of Ashley Barnes tripping a ref, a true embodiment of the lower league style that we love to see, to show us out.